The frost had a way of finding the cracks. It crept through the mortar of the kitchen walls, seeped under the heavy oak door, and settled deep into Ilara's bones. She felt it most in her left leg, a dull, familiar ache that radiated from her hip to her ankle, a constant reminder of the fall that had marked her as useless. She was humming. It was a nervous habit, a thread of sound woven into the clatter of pots and the hiss of the hearth. A nameless tune, one her mother had hummed long ago, before she was taken by the winter sickness. It was the only thing Ilara had left of her. The head cook, Marta, shot her a venomous glare. Less noise, more scrubbing, girl. The alpha of the northern hold returns today. The floors need to gleam. Ilara ducked her head, the hum dying in her throat. Yes, Marta. Her hands, raw and chapped from the harsh lye soap, returned to the great stone flags. The cold of the floor was absolute, a dead thing that leached the warmth from her fingertips. She focused on the rhythm of the work, the circular motion of the brush, trying to lose herself in it, trying to become as small and unnoticeable as the mice that skittered in the larder. She was a ghost in this kitchen, a shadow with a limp, taken in by the hold out of a reluctant pity after her father had cast her out, declaring a crippled daughter was no daughter at all. Here, her worth was measured in clean pots and scoured floors. It was a meager existence, but it was safe. It was all she thought she deserved. A sudden commotion from the courtyard outside broke the kitchen's oppressive rhythm. Shouts, the clang of steel, the low, guttural growls of worried wolves. Marta rushed to the window, her bulk blocking the sliver of gray light. What is it? Ilara whispered, pushing a stray strand of brown hair from her face with the back of her wrist. The Alpha's party, Marta grunted, her voice tight with alarm. They're carrying someone. Blood. Gods, there's so much blood. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Ilara, a different kind of cold than the one in her leg. The hold's alpha, Lord Boren, was a hard man, but a fair one. His fall would mean chaos. But the day wore on, and the chaos settled into a grim, whispered tension. Lord Boren was not the one injured. It was a stranger, a guest of immense importance, attacked by brigands on the King's Road. The hold's healer was working frantically, but the whispers were not hopeful. By late evening, the kitchens were a hive of activity, preparing poultices and broths that Ilara knew would likely go untouched. She was sent to the forest edge to gather more feverfew, a task she usually cherished. It was the only time she was allowed out from under the suffocating roof of the keep. The air was bitingly cold, the snow crunching under her good foot, her bad leg dragging slightly behind. The moon was a shard of bone in the black sky, casting long skeletal shadows from the pines. She found the patch of herbs near an ancient gnarled oak, its branches like arthritic fingers reaching for the stars. As she knelt, her stiff leg protesting, a sound reached her. A low, pained groan, half human, half beast. It wasn't from the keep. It was deeper in the woods. Every instinct screamed at her to run. The woods were not safe, especially at night. There were wild things out here, things far more dangerous than a disapproving cook. But the sound came again, and it was a sound of pure agony. It snagged on something inside her, the part of her that recognized suffering, the part of her that had lived with it her entire life. She hesitated for only a moment, then, pulling her thin cloak tighter, she limped toward the sound. She found him 20 yards in, a heap of black against the stark white of the snow. At first, she thought it was a bear, so immense was the form. But as she drew closer, she saw it was a wolf larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of a starless midnight. And it was dying. A massive, ugly gash ran along its flank, dark blood steaming as it melted the snow around it. Its breathing was a ragged, shuddering gasp. One of its front legs was bent at an unnatural angle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a monster, a predator. It could tear her throat out with its last breath. But its eyes, they were open. And in their dark, fathomless depths, she saw not rage, but a desperate, pleading pain. It wasn't a monster. It was a creature in its final, lonely moments. She couldn't leave it. She couldn't. Slowly, cautiously, she approached. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's head lifted a bare inch, a low growl rumbling in its chest, but it was weak, exhausted. There was an old trapper's cabin not far from here, abandoned for years but still weathertight. It was a foolish, insane idea. Her leg throbbed with a sharp protest at the very thought. But the alternative was to watch this magnificent creature die alone in the cold. "All right," she said, more to herself than to the wolf. "All right. We're going to try something stupid." She took off her cloak and, with immense effort, managed to work it under the wolf's massive head and shoulders. She pulled. The weight was staggering. It was like trying to move a boulder. Her bad leg screamed, fire shooting up the nerves. "Come on," she grunted, tears of effort freezing on her cheeks. "Work with me, please." The wolf seemed to understand. With a great, shuddering effort, it used its good legs to push, just a little. It was enough. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged the beast through the snow. It took an eternity. Every step was a trial, a battle against the pain in her leg and the burning in her lungs. By the time she hauled him over the threshold of the dilapidated cabin, she was shaking with exhaustion, her vision spotted with black. She collapsed onto the dusty floor beside him, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The wolf let out a long, low whine and nudged her hand with its nose. The touch was surprisingly gentle. For a moment they just lay there, two broken things in a forgotten shack, surrounded by the silent, watching woods. She built a fire first, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to strike a spark from her flint and steel. The small flame caught, grew, and began to push back the crushing cold. In the flickering light, the wolf's injuries looked even worse. The gash on its side was deep, crusted with frozen blood. She knew it needed to be cleaned. She melted snow in a rusty bucket she found in the corner, tore a strip from the hem of her underskirt, and approached him cautiously. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, her voice soft. "I'm sorry." He watched her with those intelligent, pain-filled eyes. He didn't growl as she gently dabbed at the wound. He flinched, his muscles tensing under her touch, but he remained still. The sheer size of him was terrifying. His head was as large as her entire torso, but his stillness was a form of trust, and it gave her courage. She cleaned the wound as best she could, her stomach churning at the sight. Then she tackled the leg. It was clearly broken, a nasty compound fracture. She was no healer, but she knew it needed to be set. "Oh, this is a bad idea," she whispered, looking from the leg to the wolf's massive jaws. "You have to promise not to eat me." A soft huff of air escaped his nostrils, almost like a sigh. She found 2 sturdy branches outside and tore more strips from her skirt. Taking a deep breath, she knelt by the broken limb. She gripped the leg, one hand above the break, one below. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, and pulled. A strangled yelp of agony tore from the wolf's throat, and for a terrifying second, she thought he would lunge. His head snapped around, jaws parting to reveal teeth like daggers. But he didn't bite. His eyes locked on hers, and in their depths, she saw a battle being waged. Then, with a shudder, he went limp, allowing her to finish. She worked quickly, her heart pounding. She aligned the bone as best she could, splinted it with the branches, and bound it tightly. It was a clumsy, amateur job, but it was better than nothing. When she was done, she slumped back against the wall, drained. The wolf panted heavily, his body trembling with shock and pain. She had hurt him terribly, but she had also helped him. She started humming again, the familiar, comforting tune filling the small cabin. She didn't know why. It just felt right. The wolf's panting slowly subsided. His head, which had been raised in tension, lowered back to the floor. His eyes closed. The deep lines of pain around his muzzle seemed to soften. The humming seemed to soothe him, a balm on his agony. She stayed with him through the night, dozing fitfully, adding wood to the fire whenever it burned low. She was terrified. She was a kitchen servant with a bad leg who had just performed crude surgery on a monstrous wolf. She should have been back at the keep hours ago. They would notice her absence. Marta would be furious. There would be punishments. But every time she looked at the great black form resting by the fire, a strange sense of rightness settled over her. She had done the right thing. Sometime before dawn, she woke with a start, a sound outside, the soft crunch of paws on snow, many paws. Her blood ran cold. A pack. They had smelled the blood. They had come to finish him off, or to eat them both. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the heaviest piece of firewood she could find. She stood between the door and the wounded wolf, her body a frail, trembling shield. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Through the single grimy window she saw them, shapes moving in the pre-dawn gloom. At least 5 of them. They were huge, nearly as large as the one she had saved. They circled the cabin, silent as ghosts, their eyes glowing with a faint predatory light. They weren't attacking. They were just watching, waiting. The wolf behind her stirred, letting out a low, questioning rumble. One of the wolves outside answered with a soft whine. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a report. She didn't understand. She only knew that the circle of glowing eyes was fixed on the cabin, on her. They knew she was inside. They knew he was inside. And for some reason, they were not tearing the door from its hinges. She remained standing, brandishing the log, until the first rays of sun pierced the canopy. As the light grew, the wolves melted back into the trees, one by one, until they were gone. She was weak with relief. She turned back to her patient. He was awake, and he was no longer a wolf. Where the giant beast had lain, a man was now propped up on one elbow, his body covered in her tattered cloak. He was massive, broad-shouldered, and powerfully built, even in his weakened state. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, long and untamed. His face was all harsh angles and sharp lines, a predator's face, made beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the same eyes. Not black, as she'd thought, but a startling pale silver, like chips of ice. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. His gaze flickered down to her leg, the one she instinctively tried to hide behind the other. Then back to her face. A muscle worked in his jaw. "You," he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and rough with pain, but it held an undeniable current of power. "You saved me." Alara could only stare, the log slipping from her numb fingers to thud on the floor. Her mind reeled. A shifter. She had heard tales, of course, stories told by the fire on cold nights, but to see one, and not just any shifter. The wolves outside. The sheer size of him. A cold, terrifying certainty began to dawn in her. This was no ordinary traveler. "Who? What are you?" she stammered. He tried to push himself up further and winced, his hand going to the crude bandage on his side. "I am Kaelin." The name meant nothing to her. But the way he said it, as if the name itself should carry the weight of mountains, told her everything. He watched her, his silver eyes missing nothing. They were Valerius's men, a council lord, an ambush. He gritted his teeth. "They thought they had finished me." She found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "The healer at the hold. They said a guest was attacked." A humorless smile touched his lips. "My guards brought one of my men to the hold as a decoy, to make my enemies believe I was accounted for. Dying, but in their grasp. It bought me time." He looked at the splint on his leg, his expression unreadable. "It seems I used that time to stumble into you." Ilara's world was tilting on its axis. Council lords, ambushes, guards. This man was a noble, a powerful one, and she, a kitchen maid, had dragged him through the snow and set his bones like a common farm animal. "The wolves," she said, her mind catching on the memory of the glowing eyes. "They were yours." "My royal guard," he confirmed. "They have been tracking me. They would not have let you harm me." His gaze sharpened. "And they would have torn you apart if you had tried. But you didn't." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "You helped me. Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was tangled in a lifetime of being small and overlooked. "You were in pain," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "I couldn't just leave you." He was silent for a long time, his silver eyes never leaving her. The intensity of his stare was a physical force, a pressure against her skin. She felt stripped bare, all her flaws and insecurities laid out for his inspection. The limp she tried to hide, the scarred hands, the cheap, rough-spun dress. "In all my centuries," he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, more raw, "no one has ever looked at me without fear or ambition, without wanting something. They see a king, a weapon, a prize." He took a ragged breath. "You saw a dying animal, and you showed it kindness. Centuries. King." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees felt weak. Kaelin, the Alpha King, the ruler of all the packs, the ancient, powerful, merciless king from the capital, the man whose name was a legend, a threat, a prayer. She had splinted the Alpha King's leg with a stick. She sank to the floor, her head spinning. "Your Majesty," she breathed, the address feeling alien on her tongue. "No," he said, the word sharp. "Not from you. Not here." He shifted, trying to sit up straighter, his face pale with the effort. "What is your name?" "Ilara." "Ilara," he repeated, and her name on his lips sounded like a song she had almost forgotten. He looked around the tiny, dilapidated cabin. "You brought me here, alone. You were not afraid." "I was terrified," she confessed, her voice trembling. "But you did it anyway." He held her gaze. "That is not fear. That is courage." No one had ever called her courageous, useless, awkward, a burden. Those were the words she knew. Courage was a thing for knights and alphas, not for crippled kitchen maids. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, pushing back against the familiar cold of her self-doubt. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. "You need a proper healer," she said, forcing herself to think practically. "Your leg, and the fever will set in soon from the gash." "My guard will not risk moving me yet," he said. "Valerius's men will be sweeping the woods. They know I am not at the hold. They are hunting." He grimaced. "And I am in no condition to fight." The reality of their situation settled over her. They were trapped. A wounded king and a girl with a bad leg, hiding in a broken-down shack, while enemies closed in around them. "We will have to manage here," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. The days that followed blurred into a strange, secret rhythm. By day, they were silent, hidden. Ilara would sneak out only when necessary, gathering more herbs, scavenging for food. By night, in the flickering firelight, the cabin became its own tiny world. The external siege was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Twice they heard the shouts of search parties in the distance, and Kaelin's entire body would go rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest as Ilara held her breath, praying they would not be found. Once, one of his royal guard, a massive gray wolf, appeared at the window like a ghost, gave a silent nod, and vanished. They were being watched over, but from a distance. The slightest misstep could trigger a war. The intimacy of their confinement was overwhelming. She tended to his wounds, changing the dressing on his side, checking the splint on his leg. She saw the network of old scars that crisscrossed his torso, a roadmap of 1,000 battles. He was a king, but his body was a testament to the violence required to keep his throne. He, in turn, watched her. He watched the way she moved, the slight drag of her leg that she tried so hard to conceal. He watched her hands, chapped and rough, as she stirred broth over the fire. He listened. "Tell me about your leg," he said one night, his voice quiet. She froze, her back to him. "It's nothing, an old injury." "It is not nothing," he said gently. "It hurts you." She didn't turn around. "I fell when I was a child." The lie was old and practiced. She felt him shift behind her. "Who did it, Alara?" The question was so direct, so certain, it broke through her defenses. The lie crumbled. She sank onto the stool by the fire, her shoulders slumping. "My father," she whispered, the confession torn from a place she kept locked away. "I was clumsy. I spilled hot stew. He said a daughter of his should be perfect. He corrected me." The silence in the cabin became heavy, dangerous. She could feel the rage coming off Kaelin in waves, a palpable heat that had nothing to do with the fire. The air crackled with it. "He crippled you," Kaelin said, his voice dangerously soft. "For spilling stew?" She nodded, unable to speak, staring into the flames. "Where is he now?" "He cast me out. Said I was a worthless burden. I heard he went south, looking for patronage. He always wanted to be more than he was." Kaelin was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with a cold fury that made her shiver. "When I am well, I will find him. And I will show him what it means to harm something that is mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. It should have felt like a cage. Instead, it felt like a shield. The impossible thought that she could be considered his, that she could be worth protecting, was a dizzying revelation. He told her of his own burdens, of the council that sought to usurp him, led by the ambitious Lord Valerius, of the centuries of solitude, the crushing weight of a crown worn alone. He had been searching for something, he admitted. A prophecy from a seer long dead spoke of a hidden heart, a soul with a song that could calm the rage of his wolf and settle the fissures in the kingdom. "You're humming," he said, his silver eyes locking on hers. "The first night. In my delirium I could hear it. It was like coming home." She shared the small things too. She told him about Finn, a young boy in the kitchens, mute since his parents had died, whom she would sneak scraps of food to. A small, shared secret that was hers alone. Kaelin listened to this with an unexpected softness in his expression. One evening, a fever took him. The gash on his side, which had been healing, was now red and angry. He thrashed in a delirium, muttering names she didn't know, his body burning with heat. She spent the entire night bathing his forehead with cool water, forcing sips of willow bark tea between his cracked lips, her hands never leaving him. She hummed, her voice soft and constant, the old, familiar tune. It seemed to be the only thing that calmed his spirit. In the depths of the fever, his hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. He didn't let go. Toward dawn, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear but exhausted. He was drenched in sweat, but the fire was gone. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face, shadowed with exhaustion. "You stayed," he whispered. "I told you I would," she replied, her voice thick with fatigue. He brought her hand to his lips, his kiss a soft, reverent pressure against her rough knuckles. "Ilara," he breathed against her skin. And in that moment, the world outside, the enemies, the danger, it all fell away. There was only the warmth of his hand, the intensity in his silver eyes, and the staggering, terrifying truth of what was growing between them in the heart of the wilderness. "I think," he said, his voice barely audible, that I have been searching for you for a very long time." It was not a declaration of love, not in the way the stories told it. It was something deeper, quieter, a confession of a need he had carried for centuries. And it unmade her. Tears she hadn't even known she was holding back welled in her eyes. He saw them. Gently, he reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was warm, impossibly gentle for a hand that had wielded swords and broken enemies. "Do not cry. They're not sad tears," she managed to say. A small, true smile touched his lips, transforming his harsh face into something breathtaking. "Good." The peace was shattered 2 days later. A new man arrived at the hold. He was a lord from the south, powerfully built, with a cruel twist to his mouth and eyes that held no warmth. He announced himself as Lord Gregor, come to reclaim his wayward daughter, her father. The news came from Finn. The boy, who often shadowed Alara's movements, appeared at the cabin at dusk, his eyes wide with terror. He couldn't speak, but his frantic gestures were clear. A man, a bad man, looking for her. Kalen was on his feet, the first time he had put his full weight on his splinted leg. He stood tall, leaning against the wall, but the power rolling off him was immense. "He found you." "How?" Alara whispered, her blood turning to ice. "How could he know I was here?" "Valerius," Kalen snarled, "your father must have pledged allegiance to him. He is a tool, a weapon to be used against you, and through you, against me." The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. "We have to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Now." "He will have men with him," Kalen countered, his hand resting on the hilt of a dagger she had not seen before. "I can fight, but I am not at full strength. And you?" He looked at her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, but they were cornered. Before they could form a plan, it was too late. The sound of armored men crashing through the undergrowth surrounded them. The door to the cabin burst open, splintering from its frame. Gregor stood there, silhouetted against the dying light. He was just as she remembered, barrel-chested with a face reddened by drink and a sneer that had haunted her childhood. Behind him stood a dozen soldiers wearing the silver hawk of Lord Valerius. Her father's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the scene, the fire, the meager supplies, the Alpha King, wounded but defiant, and her. His gaze landed on her with a triumphant cruelty. "Well, well," Gregor boomed, his voice thick with malice. "Look what the little cripple dragged in. Hiding in a shack with the king. You always did have delusions of grandeur." "Gregor," Kalen's voice was a low growl of pure menace. "You will not take another step." Gregor laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You are not in a position to give orders, Your Majesty. Lord Valerius sends his regards. He is most eager to secure your abdication." He took a step into the cabin, his eyes fixed on Alara. "But first, some family business." He moved toward her, his hand raised. Alara flinched back, a lifetime of fear rising in her throat. But Kalen moved faster than she would have thought possible. He launched himself from the wall, his dagger flashing. He was fast, but his injury betrayed him. His splinted leg buckled, and he stumbled. It was all the opening Gregor's men needed. They swarmed him, bearing him down with sheer numbers. Kalen fought like a cornered lion, but it was hopeless. "No!" Alara screamed, trying to run to him, but Gregor grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh like a vice. "You'll stay put," he snarled, twisting her arm behind her back. The pain was excruciating. Suddenly, a small shape darted from behind the cabin. It was Finn. He launched himself at Gregor, biting down hard on the man's leg, his small face contorted in a silent snarl of fury. Gregor roared in pain and surprise, shaking his leg violently. He backhanded the boy, sending him sprawling to the ground. Finn hit the frozen earth with a sickening thud and lay still. "Finn!" Alara shrieked, her heart stopping. Gregor laughed. He gestured to his men. Take the king and the boy. He might be useful. Then he looked at Alara, his eyes glittering. You and I are going to have a long talk, daughter. The world went gray at the edges. They bound Kaelin in silver-laced chains which seemed to sap his strength, making him weak and pliable. They slung the unconscious Finn over a soldier's shoulder like a sack of grain. And Gregor dragged her, weeping and struggling, back toward the lights of the hold. The villain had won. He had his prize, and she had led him right to it. Despair, absolute and suffocating, crushed her. The hold was a different place. Valerius's men were everywhere. The hold's own guards were either imprisoned or had been forced to bend the knee. Lord Bourne was locked in his own solar. It was a silent, bloodless coup. They threw Kaelin into the dungeons beneath the keep. Alara was locked in a small, cold chamber in the guest tower. The last thing she saw was them carrying Finn's limp body toward the healer's room, not for care, but as a hostage. Her father visited her that night. He was drunk, his face flushed with victory. Valerius is pleased, he gloated, pacing the small room. He will make me a lord, a real lord. All thanks to you, my useless daughter. You finally made yourself valuable. You're a monster, she whispered, huddled on the cot, her body aching, her spirit shattered. He laughed. Your mother used to say things like that. She was full of songs and prophecies and nonsense, a weak heart in a pretty shell. I had to beat it out of her, just like I had to beat it out of you. He gestured to her leg. That was a kindness. I was teaching you your place. The world has no room for girls who think they are special. I was making you strong. You broke me, she choked out. I tried, he sneered. But that filth from your mother's line, it runs deep. This king, he sees it in you, doesn't he? That little spark of hers. Well, Valerius and I, we're going to put it out. For good. He left her in the darkness, her hope dwindling to a single faint ember. Kaelin was captured. Finn was hurt and being held as leverage. Her father, the architect of all her pain, was triumphant. The cold she had felt her entire life settled into her soul, a frost so deep she thought it might finally kill her. The next day, Gregor dragged her from the room. He hauled her not to the dungeons, but to the great hall of the keep. It was filled with Valerius's soldiers and the cowed members of the hold. At the head of the hall, seated on Lord Boren's high seat as if it were a throne, was a man with cold, intelligent eyes and a cruel, thin mouth. Lord Valerius. Lord Gregor, Valerius said, his voice smooth as oiled steel. You bring the girl. As requested, my lord, Gregor said, shoving Alara forward. She stumbled, her bad leg giving way, and fell to her knees on the cold stone floor. A ripple of mocking laughter went through the assembled soldiers. This is the creature that bewitched the Alpha King? Valerius asked, his tone dripping with disdain. A crippled kitchen maid. How far the mighty have fallen. He stood and walked toward her, circling her like a predator. The king is proving stubborn. He refuses to abdicate. He believes his loyal packs will rise for him, but they are leaderless, confused. They need a sign. He stopped in front of her. And you, my dear, will help us give them one. He wanted to use her, to break her in front of Kaelin, to force his hand. And your father tells me you have a certain legacy, Valerius continued, his eyes glinting. A bloodline he tried so hard to stamp out. Let's see if there is any truth to the old stories. Gregor grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the massive stone hearth that dominated one wall. Show him, girl. Show the Lord the nothing that you are. He was taunting her, humiliating her. He pushed her against the cold stone of the fireplace. Her back hit the rough-hewn mantelpiece. The wind knocked out of her. Her hand flew out to steady herself, pressing hard against the stone. And she touched it. Set into the center of the mantel was a stone crest, ancient and worn with age. It was the sigil of the very first Alpha King, a stylized wolf's head carved from a single piece of black, obsidian-like rock. It was always cold to the touch, a piece of the mountain's heart brought indoors. But when her palm made contact, it was not cold. A jolt, white hot and blinding, shot up her arm. It was not a burn. It was a resonance, a deep, thrumming hum that vibrated from the stone, through her bones, and into the very core of her being. The nameless tune she always hummed, her mother's song, exploded in her mind. It wasn't just a melody anymore. It was a language. It was power. It was a key turning in a lock she never knew existed. "What is this?" Gregor snarled, seeing the strange light that had begun to flicker in her eyes. He reached for her again. "Don't," she said. Her voice was different. It was not the whisper of a frightened maid. It was low, resonant, and layered with a power that made the very air in the hall tremble. The word hit Gregor like a physical blow, and he staggered back a step, his face a mask of shock. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time, without fear. She saw a small, cruel man, terrified of the power his wife had possessed, the power he sensed in his daughter. A man who used his fists because he had no strength of his own. "You tried to break me," she said, her voice rising, gaining strength. The crest under her hand was now pulsing with a soft, internal light, a light that mirrored the one growing behind her own eyes. "You tried to silence her song." She pushed herself away from the hearth, standing tall. The ache in her leg was gone, replaced by a thrumming, vibrant energy. She wasn't just Alara the cripple anymore. She was her mother's daughter. She was the heir to something ancient and wild. "But you can't kill a song," she declared, and the power, her bloodline ability, erupted. It wasn't fire or lightning, it was sound. The melody burst from her lips, no longer a hum but a full-throated, magnificent aria. It was a song of mountains and ancient forests, of wolf howls and heartbeats, of winter ice and summer sun. The sound wave radiated from her, visible as a shimmer in the air. The torches in the hall flared, burning brighter. The stone floor beneath her feet vibrated. The soldiers of Valerius cried out, clutching their heads as the pure, raw power of the song washed over them, finding the fear and corruption in their hearts and turning it to agony. Gregor screamed, falling to his knees, his hands clapped over his ears. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" But the song wasn't for them. It was for the pack. It was for him. Deep below, in the dungeons, Kalen heard it. The silver chains that bound him, which had been draining his will, suddenly felt brittle. The song resonated in the iron of his shackles, in the stone of his cell. It was her song. It was the song of the prophecy. It was a call to his wolf, a jolt of pure life and strength that flooded his veins. With a roar that was more beast than man, he shattered his chains. The song poured through the keep, a key unlocking every loyal heart. The hold's guards, their spirits renewed, rose up against their captors. From the woods outside, a chorus of howls answered, a wave of gray, black, and brown fur cresting the hill. Kalen's royal guard, and with them, every wolf in the territory, drawn by the call of their true queen. The doors of the great hall burst inward, but it wasn't wolves that entered. It was Kalen. He stood there, bloody and bruised, but radiating an aura of absolute untamed power. His silver eyes, glowing with fury, found her. He saw her standing there, bathed in the light of her own power, her song reshaping the world around her. He saw not a crippled maid, but the magnificent, terrifyingly beautiful creature he had known her to be all along. Valerius, his face pale with terror, drew his sword. "Kill them! Kill them both!" Kalen moved. He was a blur of black, a shadow of death. He disarmed Valerius before the man could even swing, his hand closing around the Lord's throat. He lifted him from the ground, the sound of cracking bones sickeningly loud in the momentary silence as Alara's song softened to a hum. He dropped Valerius's body without a second glance. His eyes swept the room, falling on Gregor, who was still whimpering on the floor. A low, lethal growl escaped Kalen's lips, but Alara stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. The song stopped, but the power still thrummed around her. "No," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Not like this." Kalen looked from Gregor's pathetic form to her. He saw the strength in her eyes, the resolve. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Justice would be served, but it would be her justice. He turned to face the stunned hall, to the people who had mocked her, to the soldiers who had served her enemies. He pulled her to his side, his arm wrapping around her waist, a gesture of possession and pride. "You see before you Alara of the first song," he announced, his voice ringing with power, silencing all dissent. "You called her cripple. You called her servant. You were blind." His silver eyes blazed as he looked down at her, his expression softening into something so full of love and awe it made her heart ache. "She is the heart of this kingdom," he declared to the entire world. "She is my mate. She is my queen." He leaned down and kissed her, there in the center of the ruined hall, surrounded by enemies and allies. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claim, a promise, a seal on a vow made in a broken-down shack and forged in the fire of rebellion. And in that kiss, she finally, truly came home. The broken pieces of her life clicked into place, not healed over, but reformed into something stronger, more beautiful. She was not the girl who was broken. She was the woman who had saved a king. Months later, the northern wilderness was blanketed in the pristine white of late winter, but the cold no longer felt like a threat. It felt clean, promising the spring that would follow. The great hall of the hold was repaired, the obsidian crest in the mantle now gleaming with a faint, permanent warmth. Lord Boren was reinstated, his loyalty to his king and new queen absolute. Valerius's followers were scattered, and Gregor was imprisoned in the deepest cell of the dungeons, left with nothing but the ringing memory of the song that had undone him. Alara stood on the battlements, looking out over the snow-covered forest. A small hand slipped into hers. She looked down and smiled at Finn. The boy was no longer silent. The power of her song had not only healed his injuries, but had unlocked something in him as well. He spoke little, his voice soft and hesitant, but he could sing. And when he sang, the birds in the courtyard would fall silent to listen. Kalen came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid warmth. He rested his chin on her shoulder, following her gaze. "What does my queen see?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Peace," she answered, her voice full of a quiet wonder that she still felt every single day. "I see home." Her leg still carried a faint echo of the old injury, a slight limp that appeared only when she was tired. It no longer caused her pain. It was just a part of her story. Kalen would sometimes trace the faint silvery scar tissue with his thumb, not with pity, but with a reverence that made her breath catch. It was, he'd told her, the mark of the forge that had created the strongest person he had ever known. "You saw a queen when I only saw a cripple," she whispered, leaning her head back against his chest. "I saw you," he corrected gently. "I saw the steel in you when all you felt was the break. I saw the song in you when all you heard was silence." He turned her in his arms, his silver eyes serious. "You saved me, Alara. Not just from Valerius's blade, from centuries of silence." She had rescued him from his lonely throne, and he had rescued her from her invisible prison. They had healed each other. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss full of shared history and future promise. High above, a lone hawk circled in the clear, cold air. The world was quiet, waiting for the thaw. And in the heart of the northern keep, the Alpha King and his queen stood together, two halves of a song, finally made whole. The kingdom was safe, their enemies were vanquished, and their new life, earned through pain and courage, was just beginning.